Hello, welcome to this game review. In this game we'll have a look at the game where White got a pretty decent advantage from the opening, but then he couldn't quite keep his pace and he did not know how to react to certain ideas by the opponent. Later the position became very tense, very unpleasant, and eventually White blundered, which actually cost him the game. And this is quite typical of chess. This is why we don't want to get unpleasant positions. In general, sitting and waiting is not very good for us, and we will usually blunder, and then the game will actually be lost. So let's take a look. Started as a paired. Black played with c6, White played with f4, quite aggressive. Bishop d3, continuing development. Castles, castles. Bishop g4. In general, not a very aggressive move. Black usually wants to play on the queen side. Here White can at worst case take the bishop pair, and he should be happy with this. But okay, queen e2 it's kind of a weird move, not sure how the queen would help on e2. And in general, if we take so much space in the center, we should probably use it if possible. Maybe first develop pieces and then play e5 or h3 at some point to finish development and to take the bishop pair. Queen e2, well, okay. e5, and this is quite a typical move, but here after e5 White has the typical reaction, and here there's only one good reaction, and it is again the typical one, which is to take the d pawn first and then play f5. In this way we have closed this bishop on g7, we are opening the f file for our rook, and we have solidified the center. Black has nothing to attack here, and White usually has a good advantage here with play on the f file and on the king side. The bishop can go there, and White is doing fine. And this is quite a typical reaction to e5, and as mentioned here, it was the only reaction. Instead, White took the pawn, and of course the pawn is on offer, but we take such pawns only if we're sure that we can keep it, because as we see, the structure has been ruined, this bishop has been opened, this e5 square is very weak for us when Black can use it to his advantage, which he did. And here White cannot defend his pawn, as Black can just take it because of the pin. And now Black is doing very well, similarly to the game. Here Black took, and at this point White should understand the importance of the e5 pawn, I mean e5 square, and take with the pawn, so that later he can push his pawn to f4 and take away the square, and then potentially start an attack again. His king is not very weak, as Black's pieces are quite far away and White's pieces are close by. But after this, the positional problems are aggravated. Now rook g3, which is also a bad move, and this is what happens when our position is unpleasant. We tend to make more mistakes. Here White should just keep the rook on some normal square like f1 and then develop the last pieces and try to play on. The rook on g3 isn't very well placed. Here Black takes this terrible bishop on d3 with his great knight. Of course he should just develop instead, but okay, here the pressure is kind of relieved. Knight in d7, a new knight goes to e5. Meanwhile White is not really doing anything. Like moves like bishop f2 don't really help. White should try to gain something. Firstly, just finish development. The rook can't be bad on an open file. For example, here we can put the rook here, it's quite safe. And Black doesn't really have a way to exploit his big advantages positionally, so like rook a d8. And for example, after some moves, White should be quite fine. There's not much to look at here. Black is of course doing very well, but White should be fine. Bishop f2 seems like a waste of time. Bishop h6 as well. Black should probably gain space on the king side, I mean queen side, and eventually start creating actual threats. For example, now knight c4. This knight on e5 is very good. Okay, here Black wasted some time. This gave White the ability to develop. A few moves later, some pieces were exchanged, and here queen d2 happened, which the engine doesn't like, because there is some small tactic here. It's a nice variation, starting with knight f3. White has to take, takes here, and here if white takes with this piece, with the bishop, then after c5 he will lose his bishop and black will remain an exchange up, though it is not clear yet because there is queen c3 using a pin, but now the rook can take here, and after this queen g3 check is very important, and later black will take here, and at the moment everything is equal, but black is a lot more active and his king is a lot safer than white's. So there were also other variations. For example, if here, now again c5, and here white has the option of going here, and at the end of this variation black is actually having only a rook and a pawn for 2 pieces, but this is a very good version because his rook is extremely active and he will quite likely take these 2 pawns, and then he will have a lot of passed pawns here. So this is quite difficult perhaps, but it is a nice combination to see. Okay, at the end the pieces were again traded. Black's improving his position. White should probably do the same, maybe play a4 or something, b3, put some pawns on light squares. Okay, king h1, knight goes to, well, it tried to go to f3, but here the position is quite bad for black, for white. So instead knight e2 happened again, knight f4, bishop d2, but now the problems are getting a bit more real. Here white could have bailed out finally with knight d3, exchanging everything. Here black has to play f6, which is quite an ugly move, and at this point white can take with whatever he wants, probably just a knight, and after this now move the bishop. Now white's bishop is better than black's, his queen is quite well placed, and maybe even white can play for some advantage here. But white has to understand that he shouldn't really go back without any reasons. Now queen f6, and g3 was played, which is a big blunder, and it just blunders to a pretty simple tactic with g5. And next this king will have been weakened very severely because of this move. Instead, again, white's position is a bit unpleasant, as black has this great knight on e5, he has this weakness on e4, and white's targets are not very obvious. Still in this game, white still hasn't done anything active, and it is quite difficult. The engine suggests b3, probably just to not lose this pawn in some variations, maybe play a4 at some point, maybe a5 to create some weaknesses here, or fix the a7 pawn, and try to hold on. But after this, black won quite simply with g5. After knight g2, this is even checkmate. But at this point, there wasn't much to say for white. For example, after this is also checkmate, and not much else is possible. So in this game, white suffered quite a bit before losing, and it's hard to suggest anything, but it's important to understand that we cannot take this e5 pawn and ruin our structure so much unless we are sure that we can either keep the pawn or get something in exchange. Because here white did not get anything for the pawn, for the square on e5 and the weakness on e4, apart from the 2 bishops, but this bishop is kind of useless anyway.